Well, hello, traders and investors. I'm Elliot Little, and this is your daily NeoTA wrap. We take a look at these markets, doing it from a neoclassical perspective. That means each time we're asking ourselves what happened today and what might it tell us about the coming ones. I do this show 4 times a week, every Monday through Thursday, broadcast at 10 o'clock Eastern Time. It's archived on YouTube, and it's under the channel L.A. Little. If you haven't subscribed and you want to, just reach up in the right-hand corner and do so. Anytime I push content, you'll get a notification. As far as what happened today, let's take a look at the numbers. Pretty much a red day across the board. We haven't seen that in quite a while, right? This market has found a way to go up almost any reason it could find. But if you take the look across these, right, you've actually had a little bleed. And that's kind of really correlated here to the oil market. I believe the oil market was a good piece of what's happening. Fears are starting to come into this market with respect to the oil market, the bankruptcies, all that kind of stuff that we saw earlier in the year. And now people are starting to talk about $30 oil again. We'll take a look at oil and see if we think the same thing. You had money running to what? To safety, bonds, gold, silver, all those kinds of places. Elsewhere around the world, Europe trades down a little bit, nothing big. And Asia was pretty much mixed last night. So let's turn our attention to the actual indexes and see what we have. So if we pop over and grab the charts, let's do that and see what we got here. So starting here with the S&P 500. And it's actually got a little bit more interesting today because we finally have something happening instead of just a grind higher. For so long here, it's just been grind, grind, grind. It doesn't matter. We're just going to grind to the top and just keep going. Well, now it's a little bit different. Here's a swing point high. We broke that swing point high on this bar. And matter of fact, let's just point them out, and then we'll clean it up, and we'll actually do the rest of it. That's the swing point high. This is the breakout. You can see it from this red arrow. TA Today charts always show you what the breakout is when it takes place. So if you draw a line across there, across the top, right? Take the top of that bar and just draw your line straight across. And then take the bottom of that bar and draw your line straight across there. What is that? That's the retest regenerate zone. And what that means is that when prices come back into that area, depending on the characteristics of what is taking place, you look to see if the buyers are going to show up and buy it or not. Well, sure enough, they just inch into there today, and then what do they do by the end of the day? Well, they push it right back up to the top. 2175.63 was that number. 2175.49 is where it closed. So it hasn't quite, quote-unquote, regenerated, but it tested into it, turned around, tried to push back out. Now, when you're doing a retest regen, and now let's clean it up so we can look at it that way. When you're doing a retest regen, you want to look at this bar, right, which happens to be that one, volume-wise. You want to look at that bar, which was the swing point high, which happens to be that one. Which one has the most volume? This one does over here. And then when you come back into it, you want to look at the volume pressing into it. And the question you're asking yourself is there more or less sellers as we come back? In other words, do they expand? Do we get more? Do we see more people willing to sell at lower and lower price? Well, in the case of today, it doesn't look that way. And what that suggests is that, maybe you get a test in the morning, but they're probably going to flip it around and try to take it right back up. And they're going to try to regenerate to the top side. And so that is the way that one looks. Let's take a look at the others. I haven't actually looked at those as closely, so let's take a look at those and see what those look like. Starting with the NASDAQ. Actually, let me pop that out of the way, and let me get the NASDAQ up here. All right, so on the NASDAQ, what do we have here? So on the NASDAQ, you actually come back in. Now, here you don't have retest regens, but this was a break over a previous high, right? Even though it wasn't a swing point high, it was a high. You get a break over it, had a little bit more volume. Now you come back into it. That's a little gap area. Yeah, all this looks positive as well. Let's look at the NDX and see what that one looks like. And NDX also looks well, hasn't even got back to it. Now, one thing I would point out, and I don't want to take the goodness off of all this goodness that we keep having, but you do have a straight up move here, and now you have the first opportunity to get over back under on that move. And so that may lead to some sort of a pullback on these markets in the coming weeks, right? But right now, it's a little early to talk about that. We're only on Wednesday. If it were to do that, then the first thing you would look for is what you always look for, and that is, what are you going to come back to test, right? Because the neoclassical is all about test. It's about what the market tells you when it gets to something of significance. Significance usually is a swing point high or low, and it's one of those things that you look for, and as it comes back into that, that would be an interesting test. And so that's the way it's shaping up a little bit on the longer term. Let's look at the Russell real quick and see if that's any different and see what we got there. And so the Russell was also back as quick, actually as quick or more quick than any of the others, and also no volume. So Russell still into it halfway down in this bar. Russell, if I look at these, probably looks like the weakest one. But again, I think it's a little early to make that kind of a call. Okay, so we had a viewer request to take a look at Dave & Buster's, symbols PLAY. And the question was, what is this thing doing, and what can we expect on a daily, weekly time frame? So let's take a look at this and see what we think. Now, on the daily time frame, you actually had some sort of a little breakdown take place here. So the push-up is over here, right? And that was on an earnings probably. That looks like back in earnings time period, June. Not certain, but I'm assuming that's what this is. But nevertheless, whatever it is, you had a nice big spike up in volume. Push it up, but now you're back underneath it. So, if I were just looking at this chart, I would kind of divide it up into ranges, right? Because you've clearly got some sort of a range up here. And then you have one up underneath it. And actually, let me clean that up so that the lines look right so that we can draw it correctly. And then if we make another one of those and drag it down so we can see where it projects to, it brings you back into this area down here. So it's about halfway down. Now it's pushing back up. Needs to get back up in that range. To do that means you have to get back over that big bar. We've already seen it try to do that once, right, with this spike here, but was unable to. And so that's a little slight of a negative. You don't see much volume on the way back up here, so all of that's a little bit of a negative. So when I'm looking at it on this time frame, there are definitely some clear negatives out there. Let's swing back out, though, to the weekly, see how that one looks. So on the weekly, it's a little different story, right? Because on the weekly, really, you had the breakout over this swing point high, and so you have a nice formation here, right, where you're coming back to do a retest regen. The highest price point looks like, let me get this price, that's 4306, 4335. So 4335 is the one, that's the small one. And so you're doing a retest regenerate off of it, and the volume here compared to the volume back is much stronger. And so even though it tested down in there, you got a nice bounce off of it. And so the way this looks to me is that you tested it with enough volume that you could test again. But so far, this looks very positive in that this is probably going to regenerate to the top side. And if we bring it to the monthly, take a look at it, you have the same sort of thing, right? So I think longer term, you're probably okay with this. I think shorter term, they may test you some more. So overall positive if you're thinking about it from an intermediate term perspective. And if I go back to that intermediate term time chart, and let me grab it again, I don't think I would let it get much farther underneath here, right? I mean, that's kind of the key price point. About 40.80 is where I'd be protecting myself. And so you'd give it some room up underneath there, and then you protect yourself in that way. Let's look overseas, switch our attention there, try to get a feel for what's going to happen. So you had that big spike up on German market, and there wasn't much volume with it. Tonight you get over it, probably under it on less volume after a pretty good move. This looks like it can pull back some more. Let's look at the French market, and that one also didn't even get up there. And then finally, let me look at Swiss, because the Swiss one is the one that's most interesting anymore. And that does an over-under and a test on that bar. Remember, I was talking about this bar was the key bar on the way up. So it's 8254, 825396. Misses it by, what is that, like 7 cents, right? Misses testing the top. That's a pretty good test, and it fails. The sellers come in, right? I mean, think about what he's telling you. You go up, you go to something significant. And I've been telling you for a while, that's the significant bar right there. And so you go up, you go into something significant, right? So you trade into this thing, or you almost get over this thing. You almost get to the top. And what do? Look at the hanging man that you get as a result of it. My guess is volume was low again. And if that's true, right, this thing's going to try to push back down because sellers were more willing to sell than buyers were willing to buy at a critical point. What's the critical point? It's a test of the breakdown bar. And I talked about this, I think, Sunday night, if I remember, and said that was going to be the key place this is going to try to move to, and that would be the key test. Well, they failed. It looks to me like Europe's going to try to trade lower. Now, given that we know that, and given that we saw what we saw on the S&P 500, what that suggests to me is that you're probably going to see Europe trading lower by the time we come in, and that's going to cause our stock market to probably try and trade lower to start the day. And so given that, if I go back to the S&P 500, what I expect we're going to see tomorrow is we're probably going to see this market trade back a little bit deeper into this swing point high, right, and try to get to the bottom of this bar, 2168.79. That's where I expect it to try to get to, and that's where I expect the buyers to show up. Have yourself a good one. Thanks for joining me. Take care. And until next time, I'll see you. Bye.